Tonight, we're unraveling the scandalous truth about Catherine of Aragon. Far from the passive victim history paints her as. Did you know she defended England as regent during the Battle of Flodden while Henry was off gallivanting? And her embroidery wasn't just a hobby, it was a silent weapon of power. So how did the Queen, who ruled in Henry's absence, end up exiled and humiliated? Get cozy as we peel back the layers of propaganda to reveal the strategic mind behind the dignified Queen. Picture Henry VIII in France on a vanity campaign, dreaming of military glory. Now picture England in September 1513 vulnerable, with Scottish troops massing at the border. Catherine remained in London pregnant with Henry's child, except she wasn't just keeping the throne warm. She was about to become the first queen consort in English history to personally oversee a military campaign. When James IV of Scotland invaded, exploiting England's undefended northern border, Catherine didn't panic. She issued commissions for troop levies within days. The Spanish ambassador reported she appeared before the Royal Council with as much earnestness as if she had been Roland at Roncesvalles. This wasn't ceremonial leadership. She approved troop deployments, arranged artillery shipments north, and secured funding by pawning her own jewels when treasury funds ran low. Her battle preparations reveal strategic thinking. Knowing English forces were outnumbered, she instructed the Earl of Surrey to exploit Scotland's reliance on outdated pike formations. When the armies met at Flodden, English billhooks butchered the tightly packed Scottish schiltrons. Later inventories show Catherine personally authorized the issuance of specialized polyarms from the Tower Armory weeks beforehand. Over 10 Scots died, including James IV. Catherine sent Henry the dead king's bloodstained surcoat as a trophy. Contemporary chroniclers noted something unusual. Whereas medieval queens typically supervised from a safe distance, Catherine's handwritten letters to commanders show tactical awareness. She questioned deployment timing, stressed supply line security, even suggested exploiting marsh terrain. Cardinal Wolsey, no admirer of Catherine's, grudgingly admitted her grasp of logistics rivaled seasoned generals. Yet this military victory carried a bitter irony. The same traits that made Catherine formidable, clear-eyed pragmatism, rapid decision-making, later infuriated Henry during their divorce battles. Flodden proved she could rule like a king. That terrified Henry's fragile ego far more than any battlefield defeat ever could. The queen who secured England's northern border would soon find herself powerless against the one enemy. No amount of military strategy could defeat a husband rewriting reality itself. While Henry saw embroidery as women's work, Catherine transformed her needle and thread into political weapons. 16th-century noblewomen spent hundreds of hours stitching, but most created floral patterns or biblical scenes. Not Catherine. The few surviving pieces, bearing her mark, reveal something far more calculated: tapestries featuring pomegranates, her personal emblem, intertwined with Tudor roses, signaling her unbreakable connection to the throne despite Henry's attempts to erase it. Catherine's workshop produced altar cloths and hangings that told very specific stories. One confirmed piece depicts Saint Catherine of Alexandria, her namesake, triumphing over pagan scholars. Another shows the Virgin Mary crowned as Queen of Heaven, a none too subtle parallel to Catherine's own position. These weren't just devotional objects. When displayed at court, they visually reinforced her claims of legitimate queenship at a time when Henry was calling their marriage invalid. The financial records tell an interesting story. While most queens purchased finished embroideries from Flemish workshops, Catherine's accounts show heavy spending on raw silks and gold thread. She maintained a full staff of Spanish and English needlewomen in her private chambers. This wasn't about saving money, it was about control. By keeping production in-house, she ensured only approved designs circulated. Her ladies-in-waiting later testified they were instructed to destroy any flawed works, rather than let imperfect versions leave her presence. What makes this clever is how she exploited gendered assumptions. Male courtiers dismissed needlework as domestic decoration. Yet these textiles appeared in throne rooms, embassies, and churches across Europe. When the French ambassador received a gift of Catherine's embroidered gloves in 1520, he missed the message the cuffs depicted the judgment of Solomon, a pointed commentary on royal wisdom versus rash decisions. It took him 6 months to realize he'd been insulted. Recent textile analysis reveals physical evidence of Catherine's defiance. A cushion cover at Hever Castle contains a hidden layer of fabric stitched with the Latin phrase Fidei Defensor, Defender of the Faith, the title Henry later stole from her. Conservators found the subversive layer had been deliberately covered after Catherine's exile, likely by servants hoping to avoid the king's wrath. The stitches form unusually tight knots, suggesting the embroiderer worked with tense, angry precision. Even in exile, Catherine used needlework to communicate. Letters to her daughter Mary often included patterns or partially completed pieces, a safe way to send political. One surviving sampler given to Mary carries small squares with biblical figures, Judith, Deborah, alongside quieter examples of piety. The layout nudges Mary toward the strong ones. Catherine always signed these gifts the same way: Queen Catherine. She never accepted the new style of address, not Princess Dowager. Her title was a statement. In 1531, the Spanish ambassador noted new hangings from Catherine's household. Saint Helena discovering the true cross, steadfast faith in the midst of trial. Henry's officers seized them before they could be shown. He understood the power of a message stitched in silk and gold. Sermons could be ordered, but thread could still speak. Yet the symbolism had a limit. Tapestries whisper, royal proclamations do not. The same hands that worked elegant borders would later hold prayer books. Less advocacy, more devotion. Petitions to a pope who could not or would not intervene. Henry's request for annulment in 1527 might have ended her story. Instead, Catherine turned his great matter into a long legal campaign. 6 years. A patient, precise use of church law. Not the path of most queens in her position. She did not fade. She did not retire quietly. She learned the system and pressed every point. 2 facts anchored her case. First, her marriage to Arthur likely was never consummated. She swore to this under oath. Second, Pope Julius II had issued a dispensation covering any impediment of affinity. These were not emotional appeals. They were technical clauses that forced judges to read documents, not desires. Her tactics in court were measured and direct. When Cardinal Wolsey urged her toward a convent, she rose, left the hearing, and appealed to Rome. It paused the process for months. She retained Italian canon lawyers who lived inside procedure. Delays were part of the plan. Vatican files record more than 200 motions in 1528, 1529 alone. She also understood diplomacy. After the 1527 sack of Rome, Charles V, her nephew, held real influence over the papacy. Catherine's letters to Spanish envoys stressed the value of time. English ambassadors in Rome complained that decisions moved slowly. Judges were cautious. Imperial pressure was never far away. At Blackfriars in 1529, she shaped the moment. She knelt before Henry and spoke with quiet strength. I take God and all the world to witness that I have been to you a true, humble, and obedient wife. Then she departed. The court went on without her. Observers noticed she left on the arm of the Spanish ambassador. A picture worth a brief. She read the English landscape too. Royal supremacy would become the hinge. So she quietly supported scholars who defended papal authority. A pamphlet from 1530, likely commissioned by her allies, bears careful notes in the margins, corrections to Latin terms that suggest a sharper training than most expected. Public image mattered. Catherine appeared with Mary often. The site did its own work. She welcomed foreign envoys at awkward hours so they would see her plain rooms and steady composure. When her household funds were cut, she turned simplicity into statement. Her attendants wore older Spanish styles by choice, not lavish, but unforgettable. One final move showed her feel for paperwork. In 1531, she began signing as Catherine the Queen. not the required Princess Dowager. Clerks now faced a tangle. Documents bearing the disputed title had to be reworked. Days were lost in offices. Quiet pressure through ink. Her assumption, though, was that rules would hold. Henry wrote new ones. The Acts of Supremacy and Succession in 1534 did more than answer her arguments. They reshaped the frame itself and made continuing the old case within England almost impossible. Treason. The same legal acuity that prolonged her resistance meant she fully grasped the horror of this shift. Her last letters show she understood England now operated outside any framework she knew how to fight. Even after her exile to Kimbolton Castle, Catherine kept one legal card up her sleeve. She willed her lands and jewels to Mary rather than returning them to the crown as protocol demanded. This forced Henry into the ugly position of seizing his own daughter's inheritance publicly. The move had no practical effect, but it ensured history would record his pettiness alongside her defiance. The tragedy of Catherine's legal battle wasn't that she lost, it's that she proved too good at a game Henry could simply cancel. Her meticulous canonical arguments, procedural delays, and symbolic resistance worked perfectly within the medieval system she knew. But against a king rewriting reality itself, even the sharpest legal mind stood little chance. She spent her final years watching the very concepts of law and marriage she'd defended get dismantled clause by clause. By 1531, Catherine found herself exiled to the damp corridors of the Moor Castle, then later to Kimbolton, far from court, far from her daughter Mary, and seemingly far from power. Yet the woman who had outmaneuvered Henry for years wasn't done fighting. Isolated but not defeated, she turned her exile into a different kind of battlefield. Her letters tell the real story. While Henry's officials monitored her outgoing mail, Catherine developed a covert network. She wrote to the Spanish ambassador in cipher, detailing the political climate in England. Correspondence with Mary contained hidden instructions, sewing patterns marking letters for decoding, harmless recipes with ingredient substitutions that signaled key messages. One surviving letter to Charles V includes a seemingly innocent postscript about the weather that scholars now believe referenced troop movements along the French border. Household accounts from Kimbolton revealed deliberate choices. Despite limited funds, Catherine kept a handful of Spanish ladies and an Iberian priest in her service. Visitors noted she insisted on maintaining Castilian dining customs, serving meals on imported silver plate, even when hosting only her staff. This wasn't nostalgia, it was a visual reminder that she remained part of Europe's most powerful royal family. The real genius lay in her passivity. Where Henry expected rage, he got silence. When she fell ill in 1535, rumors spread she'd been poisoned. Catherine knew better than to confirm them, but she also didn't deny them. Ambassadors reported back to their courts about her failing health without realizing she'd carefully stage-managed their visits to maximize the impression of decay. Let Henry look like the villain presiding over her slow death. Her final move was the most calculated. On January 7, 1536, Catherine dictated two letters, one to Henry, forgiving him with heartbreaking sincerity, another to Charles V, urging protection for Mary. Then she deliberately chose her burial gown, the habit of a Franciscan nun, a pointed rejection of Henry's new religious order. The grave marker she requested read simply, Catherine, Queen of England, the title Henry had spent years trying to erase. The reaction proved how effectively she'd played her hand. Henry didn't celebrate her death. He panicked. Courtiers reported he grew paranoid about public sympathy shifting to Mary. The Pope began proceedings to canonize Catherine, while imperial diplomats framed her as a martyred saint. Meanwhile, her carefully crafted letters circulated through European courts, shaping the narrative beyond Henry's control. Even her burial site carried meaning. Peterborough Abbey was a second-choice location Catherine had wanted burial beside her first husband Arthur, forcing Henry to tacitly acknowledge that marriage's validity. The funeral procession included banners with Catherine's personal symbols mixed with Henry's, visually reinforcing their enduring connection despite his denials. Local peasants began leaving offerings at her grave within weeks, forcing the church to post guards against what they called idolatrous inclinations. What unsettled Henry most was realizing too late that Catherine had transformed herself into something impervious a symbol. The exiled queen became harder to combat dead than alive. Her letters continued shaping policy after her death, with Mary inheriting both her mother's network and her tactics. When Mary finally took the throne in 1553, her first act was declaring Catherine's marriage valid, posthumously winning her mother's lifelong battle. Henry had imagined Catherine's exile as an erasure. Instead, every deprived moment, the damp castle walls, the intercepted letters, the lonely death became ammunition for the legacy she was carefully constructing. The woman who couldn't defeat Henry in life ensured history would remember her exactly as she chose. The true queen, the wronged wife, the mother of England's future. While Henry married again and again seeking a lasting dynasty, Catherine achieved permanence through the quiet persistence of memory. And in her daughter's reign, every mass said for Catherine's soul, every portrait displayed with pride, every law reversing Henry's reforms served as final proof exile hadn't broken her influence, just redistributed it across decades. The queen without a crown had outplayed them all by refusing to play by their crumbling rules. So here's what history often misses: Catherine wasn't just fighting to keep her marriage. She was defending an entire system of power against a king rewriting the rules. Every stitch of embroidery, every courtroom maneuver, every letter from exile was a masterclass in political survival. The real scandal? These women weren't passive victims. They navigated a world where love could get you killed, and dignity was your last weapon. Want more Tudor intrigue? Tell me which queen we should dissect next: Anne Boleyn's strategic rise, or perhaps Catherine Parr's dangerous intelligence? Drop your pick below.